everybody refers to us in the U.S. as Americans. In Latin America, people will be like, well, we're America too. So you guys need to call yourself something else. And so, like in Latin America, for a little over a decade, they don't call us Americans anymore. They don't say Americanos. Estadounidense, I can't even say it right now. Anyway, it translates to USian. That's what we are, USian. Because in Latin America, that's more proper. There's always the slang gringo. Anybody from America is a gringo. I know white folks think gringo is some sort of slight against them, but no, it just means American.
I've never heard of this USian thing. This is new to me. Can you say it in Spanish?
Yeah. I keep fumbling over it. Estadounidense. It means...
Wow, I've never heard that before.
Yeah, so like Estados Unidos is United States, right? Yeah. So Estadounidense means USian, like you're a United Statesian. Wow, see what I'm saying?
Wow. I've literally never heard that.
But it's funny because south of the border from the US, you're United Statesian, but to the rest of the world, we're still American. You go to Europe, Americans, right? Canadians, Americans. But like, Canadians, you're American too, But there's the whole thing. Like a lot of people say, I've heard some, and I think this came around civil rights era probably. They talked about how Afro-Latinos are African Americans because they were brought to Latin America for the most part under the same circumstances, especially for like if you're looking at the Caribbean and stuff. Obviously there were Black people in Latin America before the transatlantic slave trade, but for the most part, you look at like a lot of Brazil and stuff, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, all of them, are technically African American. We don't refer to them that way in Latin America because we refer to ourselves individually as our country. So I'm Cuban, our nationality. So in Cuba, they're Afro-Cuban, Colombia, they're Afro-Colombian, things like that. So, there's a lot of differences in the way the language is, which also creates some differences in the way that it comes from the differences in the way racism is in Latin America here and the US. In Latin America, it's somewhat systemic, but not on this scale, like in the US, nowhere near it. Especially in places like Puerto Rico, obviously Haiti, but the Dominican Republic. The issue with the Dominican Republic and Haiti is tricky. I think I'll gloss and skip over that part, but yeah, it's just there are quite a few differences in the way race is tolerated or racism is tolerated in Latin America. For example, I speak on Cuba the most because I know it the best. But like in Cuba, if anybody tries to claim they're white, for example, they'll laugh in your face and tell you to show them a picture of your grandmother. And the argument is there are no white people in Cuba. And that's especially true now after Castro took over, because most of the people who tried to equate themselves with Spaniards are no longer there. So yeah, and they don't really accept whiteness as any kind of a thing other than you're lighter skin tone than the rest of us, than most of us. But yeah, it's like that in a few other places. But there's still anti-blackness that you have to contend with. It wasn't but a few years ago that Cuba had to pass anti-discrimination laws regarding its state-owned hotels, where the people managing the hotels felt that the tourists wanted to see white people, and they would keep all the Black people working in the back, all the Afro-Cubans, things like that. Well, there were a lot of complaints that were coming up, and they started coming up more regularly. And the government stepped in and was like, look, here's a new law. You can't do that anymore. We want to see Black people out front. And now it's almost exclusively Afro-Cubans pretty much everywhere you go, because that's the majority of the population. How are you going to put a bunch of white people work in the lobby at your hotel in a country that's mostly black. It makes no damn sense. So, I Cuba's had its issues with racism through the years, but I think over the last couple decades, maybe 15, 20 years, something like that, they've done a pretty good job of getting a handle on it, on systemic stuff, and passing laws and legislation and stuff that makes sure that there's equality across the board, there's equal opportunity across the board. Because of that, black home ownership in Cuba is like 60% or something. It's pretty high. Whereas before Castro, you weren't even allowed to be in a public park if you were black. So, it was pretty, it was a very oppressive society before Castro. And for all his faults, he did a lot to make the country a lot more accepting of a lot of things, including the LGBTQ community, which he was very against at the beginning of the revolution. And, now they're just in 2022, they passed laws protecting trans rights, protecting gay marriage, protecting gay families from adopting children, to adopt children. So yeah, I mean it's become a much more diverse and accepting society over the decades, and I take a lot of pride in what Cuba is even now under a so-called communist regime. I take a lot of pride in our history and things like that. Like one of the things we talk about what we don't get taught here in the United States. And one of the things a lot of people aren't really aware of is from 1975 to 1991, 500,000 Cubans fought in Angola against apartheid. 3,000 of my people died there. And I take a lot of pride in that. A lot of pride in that. The fact that there were black, white, indigenous, most of them volunteered to go to fight against apartheid, and they sustained, a well-fought battle, and they took Angola. And that was one of the biggest turning points in finally shutting down apartheid in Africa. Everybody talks about the boycotting and the divesting and the protesting. All of that had an impact. But let's not overlook the fact that Nelson Mandela was the one that had the biggest impact, that Cuba was the first country in the world to back Nelson Mandela. Fidel Castro, first world leader to step in and said, you know what, we're going to fight. And within 2 years, Cubans were there and they fought and they, did the job. And that's a really big thing that Cubans take a lot of pride in. They take a lot of pride in African heritage, African culture. Unlike the United States, the government embraced what happened to that country with the slave trade and everything like that, and started, because of all the work that Cuba and Africa do together, there was a lot of education about, Yorubans, Ethiopians and stuff now, and the religions and the cultures and all these things that are like oral history that we wouldn't have known otherwise. And like I have just been so immersed in that over the last 10 or 15 years. And it's so deep. And every time I read something like that, I think of how shameful it is that this country refuses to teach it. And, if Black folks in this country want to learn that history, you're going to have to learn it on your own, because your government doesn't seem to care. And it's only gotten worse over the last decade, with all the attacks on Black history and CRT and DEI and blah, 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 right? It's just so anti-Black that I find it hard to believe that they think we don't see them, that they think we don't see what they're doing.
I don't think that they care. I don't think that they care whether they're seen or not. There's probably a good part of that. Yeah. People who believe they're superior, they don't spend as much time thinking about what others are, what people who are lesser than them are thinking about them, really. They don't care that much. Thanks for watching. For access to the full-length conversation and all of the 2-hour-long, unedited conversations that I've had on race, click the support link in the description below. Thanks for your support, and see you next time.